the distinct pleasure of introducing Steve Nielsen, who is the chairman and CEO of Dycom Industries. I also have the great pleasure of serving on his board, so I know him pretty well. And and Steve runs a $3 billion specialty contracting services company. So basically, they lay cable and fiber optic for the telcos and cable companies. We have big customers like Verizon and AT&T. It's a business where our top 5 customers usually represent 2/3 to 75% of our revenue. So you really have to be good to serve when you've got big clients like that. Steve he started in the electrical contracting business, his family's business, when he was at Williams. He was a grad in '85, and from hearing him talk about it, I don't think he spent a whole lot of time at Williams his junior and senior year. He studied a lot in the beginning of the semester, he said, and then would go work and then come back and take his finals, is basically what it sounded like. But so he's got huge experience in this whole sector. In '93, he joined a subsidiary of Dycom, and in '96, he became the president of Dycom. He has been a longtime friend of Lever. Jeffrey and he met at a business plan competition. Actually, I also met Steve at a business plan competition, a different one where I was a judge, and met Steve, and that's how actually we got to know each other, and I got the opportunity to serve on his board. Steve has been a mentor to folks at Lever as well as to Lever-supported companies, and we have the great pleasure of having him talk here about innovation. And I can tell you that one of the things that for all of you who are dealing with businesses that Steve is particularly good at, well, one, he's one of the smartest people I know. But 2, he also really knows his customers and understands his customers and what they need. And that's something you should all think about, be sure you're clicking in on with your new ventures. And it's particularly important when 5 of your customers represent so much of your revenue. But it is amazing the knowledge he has on them. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Steve to give you information on innovation.
Thanks, Lori. And Jeffrey, I need a copy of that for my CEO evaluation. It's next March. All right. Well, thanks, Jeffrey and Brent, for inviting me to speak today. As Lori indicated, my family and I have many connections to Berkshire County. I actually grew up in Hampden County down in Southwick, just west of Springfield, graduated from Williams. And my first job out of Williams, in part, was working for my grandfather's power line construction business, whose largest client at the time was Northeast Utilities, now known as Eversource. And it was pretty amazing when I pulled up here because a long time ago I had crews that worked out of the Silver Lake substation, which if you look down the hill, you could see some trucks parked down there today. And so if I think back to a long time ago and said if I had ever been, as I was dealing with some issue in Pittsfield with those crews, look up the hill and see a facility like this, see a commitment by Pittsfield and by Berkshire County in general to growing the economy and creating opportunity for the citizens, I can tell you I wasn't thinking about it then, and I'm amazed that I'm here today. My wife, Elizabeth, and I have a second home in Hancock. We've been there since 2002. And then we recently purchased an old dairy farm that's adjacent to Brody Mountain in New Ashford. So we're committed to Berkshire County ourselves. So Lori told you a little bit about Dycom. I'll tell you a little bit more. We'll go to the next slide. So we're a New York Stock Exchange traded public company. Market cap's about $2 billion, give or take. We're headquartered in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. As Lori said, we provide engineering, construction, and maintenance services to telecommunications companies, cable and telephone, and wireless carriers. We work all over America with the exception of Alaska. We only go there every once in a while. Our biggest state for employment is California, with almost 2,000 employees there of our total of 14,600. And what drives our business and what's been really evident through the sadness of the pandemic is that the upgrades we do to communication networks, the fiber technologies that we're installing are absolutely crucial to social and economic progress. And I was talking to Don, who's had lots of activity here in Western Mass around that topic for a long period of time, but there's nothing that's been more evident over the last 18 months that if you're not connected, if you can't work remotely, if you can't have distance learning and you can't have access to telemedicine, that's something that the country's decided that we're not going to tolerate anymore. And so lots of activity all over the country in our core business. And so a little bit more. When I joined the business, DICOM, in 1993, the industry was really dominated by private companies. It was still pretty fragmented. The companies were private, they were nimble, they were agile, a lot like my grandfather's business. And in fact, there were a couple public companies, of which DICOM was one. They were smaller than the largest private companies. So a very different industry structure 28 years ago. And so throughout the last 20-some years, through a series of 40 acquisitions, as well as organic growth, we've achieved a pretty broad market presence, as you can see on the map, and a lot of brands that we go to the market. There's about 25 business units that we manage on a day-to-day basis, about 40 brands that we address opportunity with. Here in Berkshire County, I did some checking this week to see what our latest activities were here, and we actually completed a couple of fiber optic cable runs for for Richmond Telephone, which is the only non-Verizon phone company in the state of Massachusetts. And then I also looked and found that several years ago we built the mass broadband, I guess 123, is that how we say it, Don? Yeah, middle mile project, and have wired a whole bunch of towns, not in Berkshire County, but in Hampden and Hampshire, including, and I wrote this down, Huntington, Conway, Whately, Irving, Gill, Hardwick, Buckland, Northfield, Shelburne Falls, Montgomery, Worthington, Middlefield, and we have Tolland in progress. Those are all through Comcast. So a pretty active presence in this part of the state. Let's go ahead here. So as Lori said, we work for big customers. One of the interesting things about our business is that if you look at our top 5 customers and go back 15 or 20 years, they've consolidated along with our industry. So if I took these customers and went back to the year 2000, they probably represent 15 entities that over time have merged and consolidated. But we work for folks like AT&T and Verizon, Comcast and Charter, Lumen, and then a whole host of other Frontier Communications. We have a big project going in Connecticut right now where they're deploying lots of fiber. It's one of the biggest, believe it or not, Connecticut has one of the biggest individual fiber deployments in the country right now. They're going to pass about 280,000 homes this year, which is a pretty substantial chunk of Connecticut. And so as our industry consolidated, in part, that was because our customers were doing that too. I did that again. Here we go. So if we think about my time with the company, last 28 years, when I joined, the company had $137 million in revenue. We've grown it to, as Lori said, just over $3 billion. That's a little over 12% compound annual growth rate. But what's also interesting, because in companies that often do lots of acquisitions, they can become less innovative and they stop growing organically. But underneath this chart is an organic growth rate of about 5%. So that even despite all of the merger and integration activity, we've really grown at kind of a 2 times GDP rate in an industry that in overall has been growing, but has been growing slowly. So if we think about in a fragmented industry where we're competing with lots of nimble and agile private competitors, and with a number of customers that are large and not bashful about using their power to make sure that they get good pricing, How do you grow over a 28-year period at a 12% compound rate? And that brings me to the topic that Jeffrey asked me to speak on, innovating within. So today I'd like to share 3 core observations about innovation within an existing enterprise. And I think, innovation within startups, because of the success of Silicon Valley and, the number of companies that 20 years ago were still in somebody's garage and now are multi-billion-dollar enterprises, I think we understand that. We think that's, it's an important part of the economy. But I think the challenges to innovating within existing enterprises can also create lots of opportunities. So three core observations about innovation from within. First, in every enterprise, innovation is a choice, and we'll go more into that. Second, innovation, unlike how most people think about it, is not what you do, it's who you are. And then third, innovation without integration to the rest of the enterprise generally doesn't succeed. So we'll take them one at a time. So compared to a startup, I think in an ongoing enterprise, innovation is really hard. There are elements that you have to think about in an existing business that startups are blessed not to. In fact, that's what startups are supposed to do, is not be confused by other considerations at a bigger company. But the reason I think bigger companies fail to innovate sometimes is not because it's easy and they're not paying attention, but because it's so hard. And if you think about an existing business, always has to choose between supporting the business today as it confronts those daily challenges that come up in every business, and investing in efforts that will transform the business for the future. So there's always that trade-off. How do I get through today? I've got 5 customers that are 3/4 of my revenue, and they all have their agendas for what they need us to do. But at the same hand, I've got to be looking ahead, right? And that trade-off or that balancing, it always makes innovation in an enterprise, existing enterprise, different. So if you think about today's existing products, processes, and customers are known, right? They're producing cash flows. If we're performing well, people are getting bonuses. And change is uncertain, right? Innovation is uncertain. It requires investment that may not pay. And so one of our businesses, as an example, was going through a very challenging period as it competed with a new private equity consolidator. And not surprising for those who've been around private equity, their theory for rapid growth was to lower price points with existing customers, at least to a level that we didn't think we could provide the quality that our customers demanded at a cost structure that was competitive. And so at that point in time, this is about 10, 12 years ago, we had a choice: reduce costs and service quality and match the price in the marketplace, or innovate. I mean, it was pretty simple. and when we thought about that, we had a kind of a seminal moment in that business where I was unhappy with the level of quality they were producing. And I said, I don't care if we get down to 1 employee, but it's going to be one we can be proud of. And I think at that time we had about 1,800 people in that business. So that was quite a message. And so we chose, not surprisingly, for us, we chose to innovate in that business. We started applying some new technologies in our field forces, ways they could document their work that was recorded with GPS devices. We changed some back office process, and we really changed the culture in that business. And it was interesting when we did that, when we were focused relentlessly on getting rid of poor quality, we actually found customers that we had for long periods of time, but we never understood that they valued quality because we hadn't been delivering it. And so over a period of time, as we innovated around quality delivery, we actually found customers that were willing to actually pay us more once they saw that we could deliver more that we had never seen in that business. Now, that journey of innovation in that business wasn't always very pleasant. It started out as about a $200 million a year business. We shrank it to get it under control to about $125 million. And as anybody who's been around public companies, you know, shrinking revenues in a public company doesn't win you awards from any investors, right? But that's what it took to innovate that business, because we couldn't innovate at scale, we couldn't change the culture, we couldn't get quality where we wanted it to be. And so we shrank it, but today that's a $250 billion business. So it's doubled off of that trough revenue figure. That's far healthier, always in needs for improvement, but far healthier than it's ever been, and a leader in that industry, one where customers come to us and try to extend our contracts because they want to make sure they can have our services based on the quality that we're delivering. The second point, innovation is not what you do, it's who you are. So when you've been at a company as long as I have and have seen competitors come and go, and businesses that we've acquired, you always, you know, at least every once in a while I step back and say, so why us? I mean, why did we get here? What were the things that we did, or the culture and values that we had as an organization that allowed us to thrive? And so you can think in general business, you know, Circuit City versus Best Buy, Kmart and Walmart, you know, Lotus and Microsoft, right? For anybody around in the early 80s, who would have ever thought, right, that you could botch at a competitive advantage that Lotus had early on in the PC development cycle. And as I've thought about that, really see three things that successful companies do to be innovative, or are to be innovative. One, they have a passion for excellence. A willingness to continuously experiment on how to be better every day. Now, everybody in business says we're all about continuous improvement. I work for some big customers. I hope they're not listening. They're a little slow to continuously improve. At least that's sometimes what's good for our business. And so everybody says it, but what I always look for is at the center of the enterprise, is there a passion for getting better? Is there somebody who gets to the end of their rope, hopefully before it gets to me, that says, I don't care what we got to do to fix this thing. If it means, you know, getting out of the business to be good at it, we're willing to do that. Secondly, you have to value curiosity about the market that you're operating in, how it's changing and where it's heading. And so often, because in an existing enterprise there are so many day-to-day demands to keep customers happy and find employees and deal with the occasional negative outcome that just comes out of nowhere, right? Companies lose curiosity about the businesses they've been in, and they begin to think that they understand kind of all there is to know. And at least in my experience, that can be deadly for innovation. And then the last value that I think is important to hold is a willingness to take calculated risks, understanding that they may not pay off. And once again, lots of companies say that, but in a big company, have 2 failed projects in a row around innovation, and see how willing you are to take a third swing at the plate, right? I mean, that doesn't make careers oftentimes, right? That makes people change careers. And so I thought back on our own business that several years ago, we bought a number of companies from a large public competitor, which at the time increased our size by about 40%. And the company, the business that we acquired represented about 8 to 10% of this larger seller's business. And when I met with the business and met with the management, I said, folks, you've got good businesses here, that's why we acquired you, but you're not innovative. And I said, tell me why that is. And when you sorted through, what I heard was, in an 8 to 10% business in a culture of the larger company that was not innovative, risk aversion was more important to them than being really good at what they did. So as I put it to them, look, folks, you know, AA ball might work there, but because we're focused on this narrow set of customers, you know, we're stepping up to the plate in the big leagues every day. Doesn't mean we're not going to strike out every once in a while, but we got to be willing to take those chances. They were improving their business, but the improvement was to maintain the business, not to transform the business. So they didn't have a passion for making themselves better. And they were incurious except when convenient. And what I mean by that, if something came to them and they had to kind of explore it because it looked a little interesting, that was one thing. But they didn't go out and look for things to learn, look for changes in their environment. So we challenge them to become passionate, be curious, and and bold. And today, that's a much larger business. It's a much more valuable business. My takeaway from that was that innovation is who you are, and sometimes in an existing enterprise, who you are has got to be challenged by leadership for it to happen. And then, lastly, innovation without integration will not succeed. And what I'm talking about there, and we'll talk about this diagram as a representation of that, is that you go into innovation knowing not all of them succeed. All companies launch projects that everyone thought would improve the business only to see them fail. And even our large customers over the last 20 years have had different approaches to network technology. Do we do 4G or 5G? Do we do DSL or fiber? Do we do fiber deep, or we do some other type of upgrade to network capacity? And we've had our own challenges inside DICOM, right? So if you're willing to take risks, every once in a while it's not going to go so well. But when I've thought about the failures that we've seen inside DICOM, I came to see that there was really one common thread, that we spent too much time thinking about innovation as launching new sets of tools, new processes, new products, new technology, and not enough time on how these innovations fit within our ongoing strategy. So many times I ask teams, why are we innovating? What's the purpose of what we're doing? And they tell me, reflexively, they tell me how they're doing, with great pride. I mean, these are projects that they've asked to be part of, they're happy what they're doing, but when asked why, they answer how, and I say that's not the same. And so when we think about, as we deploy innovation, there's always going to be differences of opinion about ongoing or proposed innovations. And again, when those disagreements get to me, it's almost always focused on how the innovation is being implemented, not why we're doing it in the first place. And in larger enterprises, you'll often find that if you ask the team, why are we doing this? They really can't say. I mean, my response is, okay, folks, if we got to print it on a t-shirt, what are we doing here, right? There's got to be a way to crystallize the purpose behind the innovation. So to address these shortcomings, we've developed this diagram. There's lots of these in business literature. This is just one that's worked for us. And it starts at the top that says, strategy. What is the purpose of this innovation? What do we hope to achieve? And again, even with my large customers, sometimes we get into a discussion and we go, can we take a couple steps back? What is the purpose here? What are we trying to get done together? Secondly, we talk about the structure. So if we've agreed on the strategy, we've got a purpose, how do we structure this? And the bigger the company, the more the arguments about the structure, right? Because structural discussions in big companies always devolve to some degree or another in politics, right? Is it staff-driven? Is it operations-driven? What's the role of IT? And the big question that in big companies, half the time we can't get an answer, like, who owns this decision? I mean, ultimately, where does this decision come from? So strategy, then structure. And when we get those right, it's amazing how then we look at the staffing, not only who we have on the project, or on the innovation, but how many people we have on the project or the innovation. That's so important, because oftentimes we might have strategy and structure right, but we totally under-resource the innovation. And then we sit there 6 months or a year later and go, well, what's the status on that? And the reality of it is it hasn't moved as much as it should have, given its importance to the enterprise. And then as we go down the stack, this is where most of the conversation, in my experience in existing enterprises, falls, is like, how do we measure what's success, or maybe even more importantly, how do we measure what's not working, what's failing? And oftentimes, right, in big companies, they publish these scorecards and dashboards and all those other things, and people get to managing the metrics, and over time, can't tell you what the strategy was, and so you sit there again and say, okay, let's go back to the top. And then finally, you know, what we call tools, or what I think most people would call innovation, new practices, new processes, new technology, the things that you're trying to get done because everybody has agreed, sometimes more implicitly than explicitly, that this is the path to measurably improving results. And so oftentimes when we find that there's a disagreement, say at the staffing level, performance is not good, somebody wants to find out, okay, why is that? That the answer is not at that level, it's always at the level above. So that if we've got a staffing issue, that probably means we've got a structural issue and nobody owns it, or the wrong people own it, and therefore we staffed it wrong, therefore it hasn't performed as well as we'd like. So at least inside our existing enterprise, when innovation is integrated from strategy down through tools, that's when we succeed. And when that connection's not tight, when it's not explicit to the teams, that's when things take too long, cost too much, and don't achieve the promise that we all started the innovation with to begin with. And so what I would say to just finish up is, you can choose to be innovative. You can make innovation a core value, who you are. But if you don't integrate those two core values with an integrated execution, it's very hard to get anything done. And so at least for us, it takes all three, but if you had to work on one, make sure that if you start with the innovation at the tool level, at the product level, at something new, that you can articulate it all the way up to the top, because it's only when it ties back to strategy that in our world that we've seen value that's been measurable and valuable. So with that, I guess I'll open up the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
Steve, as you're sitting on your deck in Hancock overlooking Peak, and you're thinking about the future of telecom, the internet, the metaverse, how do you see all these things evolving?
So clearly, if you look out over the next 10 or 20 years, there's going to be a massive increase in the number of sensors that are deployed in the economy. Every physical object is going to have a virtual analog or you know, whatever construct you want to think about. And all of that's going to require incredible amounts of bandwidth. So today, as an example, in our business, one of the key drivers to the business is the deployment of fiber optic cable to people's homes. The pandemic made that absolutely crucial. And that's what's been going on here in Western Mass with a number of these fiber deployments. I mean, it's nice to have a home, or will have a home in New Ashford when they have a fiber to the home network that I can't get in suburban 50,000 population Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, right? So we are making some headway up here. But just to give you the acceleration there, over the last 17 years since that wave started in the industry, there's been about 44 million homes passed with fiber in the U.S. Based on announced plans, that number could be as high as 50 million over the next 5 to 8 years. So what took 17 years to get done, they want to, you know, the industry has reason to get it done in half the time going forward. Next phase to that, more sensors, more wireless, more high capacity wireless through 5G technologies. And so we're all going to be able to manage things virtually that we have not considered before. And we're looking at in our own field operations. I mean, some of the Oculus-driven stuff we've looked at for training, we've looked at for field troubleshooting, so all of that stuff requires lots of bandwidth. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, sorry. I'm Deborah Gallant from E for All, Entrepreneurship for All. And my question is, for the little people, right? The startups who want to get to a company like yours, because we know that it can be really hard to innovate internally. And so some guy working in his garage may have an idea. It's traditionally really hard to get the attention of a company that's your size to knock on the door and say, hey, I've already done this cool innovation. Do you have any insights into how the little guy can get the attention of the big guy with things that might actually shortcut the whole system for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because we've done partnerships, we've done investments, we've done those things. One of the challenges of running particularly a large public company is issues that seem so simple that you don't have to worry about them, and in the private world, I've got to pay a bunch of attention to. So if I get a guy with a great innovation, but it creates a vulnerability in my IT environment and I get ransomwared, I can't move forward with that without all kinds of effort and due diligence. And so what we're trying to do is, at least inside our company, is create platforms of our own internal systems that we can leverage by plugging in smaller companies' innovations into that ecosystem. But I've got to control the ecosystem because the consequences of losing control of my IT environment, I'll be looking for another job and somebody else will be dealing with, it's just too difficult. Yeah, Jeffrey.
There's a really wonderful company here in Berkshire County called Onyx, and they make specialty papers and they're used in automotive applications. And we talk a lot with the two leaders there, and they talk about customer pull, that they innovate toward customer pull.
Right.
And then I think about someone like Steve Jobs, who said, we're going to do this. People don't know they want it yet, which is a very different kind of innovation. And I was wondering if you have any examples of that kind of, we know this is going to be useful, the customers don't know it yet.
So it's interesting, and I have a view about business consultants. So business consultants are the one that always want to pulse the customer and find out what they think you ought to do better, right? And the trade-off, or the counterpoint to that is not only Jobs, but that old Henry Ford saying, if I'd asked people what they wanted in a car, they would have said faster horses, right? And so what I would say is, you need to know how your customers are thinking about whatever service you're providing, but that should be educational, not limiting. And too often it serves as a limit. And it give you an example. In the first business I talked about where we did lots of innovation around improving quality, at that point we had an IP strategy, which a Supreme Court case that didn't go our way eliminated a lot of IP, but we had an IP strategy, and we were asked by customers to talk to our competitors about licensing the technology because it was valuable to customers in aggregate to improve quality. And so we went up and we pitched this private equity business. I knew the CEO in this technology, and he kind of, got through it. He said, that's all really interesting. He said, did your customers ask for this? I said, no, we understand our business well enough that even if they haven't asked for it, we know when we deliver it, they're willing to pay for it. Now, in private equity, 3 to 5 year time horizons, not interested, right? That was a 5-year investment for us that's, creating value 10 years later. But I'm more on the be informed by your customers, but not led. Which is also what I say to shareholders, but sometimes they want to do a little more leading than I'm comfortable with, but informed but not led. Yeah, Malcolm.
So you run a company of, I think. My bad. You run a company, I think you said, of 14,000 employees. I'm assuming mostly middle class kinds of jobs.
No, actually, I mean, we have everything from blue collar folks that are doing directional drilling to setting telephone poles to people that splice fiber optic cable, and if they're good at it, can make a couple $100,000 a year. So it's a broad array of skills.
That's good. Maybe you're even better qualified to address this question because I'm curious what you see about sort of an economy that we're in that sort of rewards innovation and innovative people, the ability to innovate at companies. How do you, the word reconcile is not the right word, but
does that reconcile with sort of a middle-class mentality, the future of the middle class? That's sort of the question I'm not asking very well.
So, I mean, broader question, luckily in my CEO job, I don't have to wrestle too much with these things, but when we do think about it, right, the challenge that I've seen in my career is not so much in the field. If they're productive and provide valuable service, I mean, the career progression, if they want to make more money, they can make more money, they can progress in life. The challenge has really been in what I'll call lower middle management that is increasingly becoming automated, mechanized, or just done away with, right? Just taking those transactions, digitizing those transactions and make them go away. And at least in our world, what I ask people to do is that as we help our technical people become more productive, that we don't take a zero-sum approach to the value creation, right? So if somebody is more productive for us, we want them to make more money as they do that, right? Not extract all that value back to the company, because over the long run, we found that sustainable. So that even in these blue-collar jobs, I mean, we have people that come to work with us or did out of high school, and they retire in the same location for the same company. And you know, that's at least been my approach to those bigger issues, is help people to be more productive so they're more valuable, and make sure that we're fair about what we share with those folks. Yeah, I had an interesting business, one that I talked about, and I said, we've got a problem here. You haven't figured out how to run your business well enough to pay your people more. And they kind of went, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But that was a challenge. And as they got better, they became more profitable, and they were able to pay more. And that's how they improved the business.
I feel indulgent. Oh,
We have one in the back there.
Well, thank you for coming to speak with us today. I was just curious, and I'm not sure exactly how to formulate the question around this, but considering that your company has tremendous resources around infrastructure, and that occasionally our country and other areas of the world are hit with disasters on occasion. Mm-hmm. Suddenly there's a large impact on the local infrastructure. Have you thought about how to innovate ways for sort of restoring services into areas, and can your business lead us in that direction? And have you thought about how to innovate around that and bring folks together?
So it's a great question. We generally have input into our customers' planning, but ultimately they're making the decisions. But what I will tell you is that in our business of communications, as networks have transitioned from copper-based networks to fiber networks, storm restoration times have decreased significantly. So in 2004 in Florida, we got hit with 2 hurricanes within a 2-week period, and we had about 3 months worth of storm restoration services and billed the client about $60 million. These hurricanes that went through or the one that just went through Louisiana, substantial damage. They'll probably get it back twice as fast and for a tenth of the cost. I mean, it's just a different, because fiber optics has no active electricity on it. It can lay on the ground, it keeps working, it can be underwater, and it keeps working. And so those networks are becoming more resilient. Now, out in California, where they're dealing with wildfires, Pacific Gas and Electric, for example, is going to spend $10 billion to underground substantial portions of the power network in high fire areas. And, you know, we're seeing that in Florida. There's a big trend towards barrier island communities. Palm Beach Island, for example, has got a 10-year project to put everything underground. So it's happening, but it's very expensive, so it's going to take a while.
I wanted to follow up on Deborah's question earlier related to early stage companies. So something we often see with early stage companies, they develop an innovation to solve problem A, mm-hmm. and they'll get some traction with it. But after a little while, they realize there's a bigger opportunity in an adjacent problem space. And I was just wondering if you guys have had that experience at DICOM.
Oh, absolutely. And I can give you a real-world example in one of the businesses. So one of our businesses provides 811 services. So if you've heard a public service announcement to call before you dig, we're the folks that would respond on behalf of a utility and actually put down marking paint on the ground or the pavement that would indicate where buried facilities are. And so we thought, and we spent a lot of time and money on this, still a great idea, we'll get it to work someday, but we spent a lot of time on taking the paint wand that we spray that paint with and enabling it with GPS technology and a processor, so that literally as we sprayed the paint, we were recording plus or minus 4 to 6 inches geospatially exactly where that paint went. And we got everything to work, and we ran into a simple issue. It was about 2 pounds heavier than any technician wanted to walk around all day and use. But when we did that innovation, we had to have some kind of digital display to display that information to excavators and our own folks, as well as document where that paint had gone, because unfortunately in that business, after it's all been dug up, and if something unfortunate happens, well, who's to say where it was before all the earth was disturbed, right? And so we developed this technology we called eSketch, where literally the technician could draw on an aerial image where the paint was going. Originally, it was going to be where the paint wad said it was going, but at least we said we can't do that. We can at least draw where it's going. And because those aerial images now are geo-encoded down to 4 inches per pixel, that if we drew it accurately, that was almost as good as our fancy paint wand with GPS and a processor and everything else. And that's core technology that we're using in many portions of our business today, not just in the original business where the innovation was necessary.
Thank you. My question is I'm curious in terms of how is DICOM Industries thinking about supplier diversity programs, and is there any innovation as you're doing that? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because we know for BIPOC communities, and especially, Black communities, if you're contracting with Black businesses, then that means that those Black businesses are actually hiring and impacting economies. So as you guys are looking forward and moving forward, we know the demographic is changing. How are you addressing that as a company moving forward?
So a couple things. In addition to the 14,000 plus employees we have ourselves, we employ subcontractors. Typically, it varies from season to season, but typically could be as many as 8,000 or 9,000 other employees. And we work with lots of MWBE suppliers to become subcontractors. The challenge, which I need some innovation around, is the certification process that we are required to do for our large customers. Lots of vendors think of, lots of MWBE vendors for good reason think of as awfully intrusive. But we typically are shooting for somewhere between 15 and 20% diversity spend of our total expense budget. So we're not where we'd like to be. We actually are more diverse in our spend, but it's more difficult to get credit because of the whole certification process that clients require. Okay. Well, thank you very much.